Okay, hope you're keeping well. So I said I would just put up a quick revision video on our case study that we learned last week, which was a case study of a factory that has changed its location over time. So the one that we looked at was the British Iron and Steel Industry. Now it's not one factory, we're talking about all the iron and steel industries across Britain over the years, and why they changed location, why they first located by the forests, then why did they go to the coal fields, and then why did they go to the coasts. So very, very quickly, let's run through it using the presentation that you have in front of you. So I suppose, firstly, they're the iron and steel industries. To make iron and steel, you need a raw material called iron ore. Iron ore is a rock. It's basically mined or dug out of the ground. And what they do in the factories is they smelt that down, which is basically melting the iron ore down by using great heat. And then it's melted into a liquid, and the liquid is poured into like molds, and the molds sit there to cool, and they cool and they form iron or steel bars, which could be used to make bridges or cutlery or surgical equipment or anything. Okay, so first location of the British Iron and Steel Industries at the start of the 18th century was by the forests and rivers. The reason why they located by the forests was because they used to cut down the trees to make charcoal. The charcoal was used to create fire. The heat from the fire was used to smelt or melt the iron ore down into iron and steel. So that made great sense. Also, they were located very close to the iron ore, and the iron ore was their raw material, so it made sense to locate close to it. Anything that they needed to transport in or out, they used the rivers to do that. Okay, so I hope that explains that okay. Then they discovered at the end of the 18th century that they were running out of, that they had cut down all of the forestry, so they had to move location. It just so happened that coal became the new source of power. So when coal became the new source of power, then they decided to locate by the coal fields. So that brought them into the 19th century. Okay, so they located by the coal fields, and that became their new source of power. And as coal is a heavy, bulky kind of a product, it made sense to locate close to it. So they mined out the coal from the coal fields. Anything like the iron ore could easily be brought in by the trains, by rail, or by canal. That was even another step up from the rivers that were used in the 18th century. So any coal or iron ore that needed to be brought right into the factories were brought in via railway or canal. Demand for iron and steel was very high at that stage because we're getting very built up in our societies. Then in the 1950s, I suppose they decided to move their factories by the coasts, all along the coast of Britain, for a number of reasons. They had exhausted most of the coal, they had dug most of the coal out of the coal fields, and they had come up with new ways of smelting the iron ore, so they didn't need to use as much coal, so they didn't really need to locate by the coal fields as much anymore. Also, they were starting to import cheaper coal from Poland, so the cheap Polish coal, so it wouldn't make sense to locate by the coasts where it was being imported from. Another reason to locate by the coasts was because they had a lot of competition from foreign steel makers who were producing the coals cheaper. So I suppose if they'd try and compete with them, they'd try and locate by the coast and get their product out quick. I think I've covered everything there with you. So I suppose the unfortunate side of that, by when they located by the coast, was when all the inland iron and steel factories shut, a lot of the people couldn't relocate to the coast with them because they just didn't want to move house. So they lost a lot of jobs. Okay, so that's the case study of the British Iron and Steel Industry. Very, very quickly, just going to industrial inertia. Quick recap on that. So what is industrial inertia? It's when a factory should move location because its original reasons for locating in that place have changed. And it would be economically better for it to move location, but it doesn't. Okay, when it chooses to remain where it is, even though economically it should move. So our case study for that was the iron and steel factory in Sheffield over in England. So the iron and steel factory in Sheffield decided to stay where it was, even though it should have moved to the coast with the other factories. So its reasons for staying where it was is because it had just modernised and done up its plant. It had made it super efficient. It wouldn't have made sense to move factory at that point after pumping so much money into doing up the factory. It had a very, very highly skilled workforce. Moving factory, moving location would have meant reskilling and retraining a whole bunch of new workers, and that would have cost them money. They had built up a good brand name, Sheffield Steel, They had cutlery and they had surgical equipment that they used to make. And if you move location, you're losing your brand name. They would have had to rename, and that would have lost some customers. They had excellent road and rail connections for their customers, so they didn't have to be located by the coast. They could get it easily to them quickly. So basically, I suppose they are a good example of industrial inertia, and how even though they should have moved, they still survived